4. Is that a realistic description of any child's character? Of course we'd love to see our kids demonstrate these qualities each and every moment of their lives. Who wouldn't want a child who plans ahead and consistently makes good decisions, controls his emotions and body, displays equability and empathy and self-understanding, and acts out of a well-developed sense of morality? But it's just not going to happen. At least not all the time. Depending on the child and the age, maybe not even frequently. So is this an excuse for bad behavior? Do we need to simply turn a blind eye when our kids misbehave? Certainly not. In fact, a child's developing brain is simply another reason we need to set clear boundaries and help her understand what's acceptable. The fact that she doesn't have a consistently working upstairs brain, which provides internal constraints that govern her behavior, means that she needs to be provided with external constraints. And guess where those external constraints need to come from? Her parents and other caregivers, and the guidelines and expectations they communicate to her. We need to help develop our children's upstairs brain along with all of the skills it makes possible, and while doing so, we may need to act as an external upstairs brain along the way, working with them and helping them make decisions they're not quite capable yet of making for themselves. We'll soon go into this idea in much greater depth, and OER practical suggestions for making it happen. For now, though, just keep this initial brain C in mind: a child's brain is changing and developing, so we need to temper our expectations and understand that emotional and behavioral challenges are simply par for the course. Of course we should still teach and expect respectful behavior. But in doing so, we need to always keep in mind the changing, developing brain. Once we understand and accept this fundamental reality, we'll be much more capable of responding in a way that honors the child and the relationship, while still attending to any behaviors we need to address. Brain C number 2, the brain is changeable. The second brain C is immensely exciting and OERs hope to parents everywhere. The brain is not only changing, it develops over time, but changeable, it can be molded intentionally by experience. If you read much about the brain these days, you'll likely come across the concept of neuroplasticity, which refers to the way the brain physically changes based on experiences we undergo. As scientists put it, the brain is plastic, or moldable. Yes, the actual physical architecture of the brain changes based on what happens to us. You may have heard about scientific studies that demonstrate evidence of neuroplasticity. In the whole brain child, we talk about research showing enlarged auditory centers in the brains of animals who depend on their hearing for hunting, and studies showing that for violinists, the regions of the cortex that represent the left hand which enjambs the instrument's strings at amazing speeds are larger than normal. Other recent studies demonstrate that children who are taught to read music and play the keyboard undergo significant changes in their brain and have an advanced capacity for what's called spatial sensorimotor mapping. In other words, when kids learn even the fundamentals of playing piano, their brains develop differently from the brains of kids who don't, so they can more fully understand their own bodies in relationship to the objects around them. We've seen similar results in studies on people who meditate. Mindfulness exercises produce literal changes in the brain's connections, significantly affecting how well a person interacts with other people and adapts to difficult situations. Obviously, this isn't to say that all children should take piano lessons, or that everyone should meditate, although we wouldn't discourage either activity. The point is that the experience of taking the lessons, like the experience of participating in mindfulness practices, or playing the violin or even practicing karate, fundamentally and physically changes the plastic brain, especially while it's developing in childhood and adolescence, but even throughout our lives. To take a more extreme example, early childhood abuse can leave people vulnerable to mental illness later in life. Recent studies have used functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, or brain scans, to discover specific changes in certain areas of what's called the hippocampus in the brains of young adults who have experienced abuse. They experience higher rates of depression, addiction, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Their brains have fundamentally changed in response to the trauma they faced as children. Neuroplasticity has enormous ramifications for what we do as parents. If repeated experiences actually change the physical architecture of the brain, then it becomes paramount that we be intentional about the experiences we give our children. Think about the ways you interact with your kids. How do you communicate with them? How do you help them re-ECT on their actions and behavior? What do you teach them about relationships, about respect, trust, and EORT? What opportunities do you expose them to? What important people do you introduce into their lives? Everything they see, hear, feel, touch, or even smell impacts their brain and thus influences the way they view and interact with their world, including their family, neighbors, strangers, friends, classmates, and even themselves. All of this takes place at the cellular level, in our neurons and in the connections among our brain cells called synapses. One way neuroscientists have expressed the idea is that neurons that read together wire together. This phrase, known as Hebb's axiom, named after the Canadian neuropsychologist Donald Hebb, essentially explains that when neurons read simultaneously in response to an experience, those neurons become connected to each other, forming a network. And when an experience is repeated over and over, it deepens and strengthens the connections among those neurons. So when they fire together, they wire together. The famous physiologist Ivan Pavlov was coming to terms with this idea when he found that his dogs would salivate not only when actual food appeared before them, but also when he rang the dinner bell for them to come eat. The dog's salivation neurons became wired, or functionally linked, to their dinner bell neurons. A more recent example from the animal world appears every time the San Francisco Giants play a night game at AT&T Park. Near the end of each game, swarms of seagulls appear, ready for a feast of left-behind hot dogs, peanuts, and Cracker Jack once the Bayside Stadium empties. Biologists are stumped as to how, exactly, the birds time their arrival for the ninth inning. Is it the increased noise of the crowd? The lure of the stadium lights? The organ playing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" during the seventh inning stretch? One thing seems clear, though: the birds have been conditioned, or primed, to expect food once the game ends. Neurons have fired together and subsequently been wired together. Hebb's axiom is what causes a toddler to raise his hands and say "hold you" when he wants to be picked up. He hardly understands the meaning of the exact words, and obviously hasn't quite figured out his pronouns. But he knows that when he's been asked, "Do you want me to hold you?" he's been picked up. So when he wants to be held, he asks, "Hold you." Firing and wiring. Having neurons wired together can be a good thing. A positive experience with a math teacher can lead to neural connections that link math with pleasure, accomplishment, and feeling good about yourself as a student. But the opposite is equally true. Negative experiences with a harsh instructor or a timed test and the anxiety that accompanies it can form connections in the brain that create a serious obstacle to the enjoyment not only of math and numbers, but exams, and even school in general. The point is simple but crucial to understand: experiences lead to changes in the architecture of the brain. Practically, then, we want to keep neuroplasticity in mind when we make decisions about how we interact with kids and how they spend their time. We want to consider what neural connections are being formed and how they will play out in the future. For example, what movies do you want your kids to see, and what activities do you want them to spend hours of time enjoying? Knowing that the plastic brain will be altered with experience, we might be less comfortable with hours spent watching certain television programs or playing violent video games. We might instead encourage our kids to engage in activities that build their capacity for relationships and for understanding other people, whether that means hanging out with friends, playing games with their family, or participating in sports and other group activities that ask them to work with others as a team. We might even purposely create time for boredom on a summer day, so they have to go to the garage and see what interesting fun they can have with a pulley, some rope, and a roll of duct tape. If someone comes back inside to Google the phrase "duct tape parachute for baby brother," you might want to break out the Monopoly board. We cannot, nor would we want to, protect or rescue our kids from all adversity and negative experiences. These challenging experiences are an important part of growing up and developing resilience, along with acquiring internal skills needed to cope with stress and failure and to respond with flexibility. What we can do is help our children make sense of their experiences so that those challenges will more likely be encoded in the brain consciously as learning experiences, rather than unconscious associations or even traumas that limit them in the future. When parents discuss experiences and memories with their kids, the children tend to have better access to memories of those experiences. Kids whose parents talk to them about their feelings also develop a more robust emotional intelligence and can therefore be better at noticing and understanding their own and other people's feelings. Neurons that read together wire together, changing the changeable brain. It all comes back to the point that the brain changes in response to experience. What do you want your children to experience that will affect their changeable brains? What brain connections do you want to nurture? And more to the point in this book, knowing that a child's brain is changeable, how do you want to respond to misbehavior? After all, your kids' repeated experiences with discipline will be wiring their brains as well. Brain C number 3, the brain is complex. So the brain is changing and changeable. It's also complex, which is our third brain C. The brain is multifaceted, with different parts responsible for different tasks. Some parts are responsible for memory, others for language, others for empathy, and so on. This third brain C is one of the most important realities to keep in mind when it comes to discipline. The brain's complexity means that when our kids are upset, or when they're acting in ways we don't like, we can appeal to different parts of their brains, to different regions and ways the brain functions, with different parental responses activating different circuitry. We can therefore appeal to one part of the brain to get one result, another part to get a different result. For example, let's go back to the upstairs and downstairs brains. If your child is melting down and out of control, which part of the brain would you rather appeal to? The one that's primitive and reactive? Or the one that's sophisticated and capable of logic, compassion, and self-understanding? Do we try to connect to the one that responds as a reptile would with defensiveness and attacks, or to the one with the potential to calm down, problem solve, and even apologize? The answer is obvious. We want to engage the upstairs brain's receptivity, rather than trigger the downstairs brain's reactivity. Then the higher parts of the brain can communicate and help override the lower, more impulsive and reactive parts. When we discipline with threats, whether explicitly through our words or implicitly through scary nonverbals like our tone, posture, and facial expressions, we activate the defensive circuits of our child's reactive reptilian downstairs brain. We call this poking the lizard, and we don't recommend it because it almost always leads to escalating emotions, for both parent and child. When your VE-year-old throws a tea at the grocery store, and you tower over him and point your anger and insist through clenched teeth that he calm down this instant, you're poking the lizard. You're triggering a downstairs reaction, which is almost never going to lead anywhere productive for anyone involved. Your child's sensory system takes in your body language and words and detects threat, which biologically sets the neural circuitry that allows him to survive a threat from his environment to GHT, to EE, to freeze, or to faint. His downstairs brain springs into action, preparing to react quickly rather than fully considering alternatives in a more responsive, receptive state. His muscles might tense as he prepares to defend himself and, if necessary, attack with freeze and GHT. Or he may run away in IT, or collapse in a fainting response. Each of these is a pathway of reactivity of the downstairs brain. And his thinking, rational self-control circuitry of the upstairs brain goes offline, becoming unavailable in that moment. That's the key. We can't be in both a reactive downstairs state and a receptive upstairs state at the same time. The downstairs reactivity holds sway. In this situation, you can appeal to your child's more sophisticated upstairs brain, and allow it to help rein in the more reactive downstairs brain. By demonstrating respect for your child, nurturing him with lots of empathy, and remaining open to collaborative and reactive discussions, you communicate no threat, so the reptilian brain can relax its reactivity. In doing so, you activate the upstairs circuits, including the extremely important prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for calm decision-making and controlling emotions and impulses. That's how we move from reactivity to receptivity. And that's what we want to teach our children to do. So instead of earnestly demanding that your V-year-old calm down, you can help quiet and soothe the downstairs brain and instead bring the upstairs brain online by gently inviting him to be physically close to you and listening to whatever he's upset about. If you're in a public place and your child is disturbing everyone around you, it may be necessary to take him outside while you attempt to appeal to his upstairs brain. Research supports this strategy of engaging the upstairs brain rather than enraging the downstairs. We've seen, for example, that when a person is shown a photo of a face that's angry or afraid, activity increases in a region of the downstairs brain called the amygdala, pronounced amygdalu, which is responsible for quickly processing and expressing strong emotions, especially anger and fear. One of the amygdala's primary jobs is to remain alert and to sound an alarm anytime we are threatened, allowing us to act quickly. Interestingly, simply seeing a photograph of a person with an angry or frightened face causes the viewer's amygdala to activate. In fact, even if the viewer sees the photo so quickly that he or she isn't consciously aware of having seen the picture, a subliminal, instinctual, emotional reaction causes the amygdala to fire, or become active. What's even more fascinating about the study is that when viewers were asked to label the emotion in the picture, and named it as fear or anger, their amygdala immediately became less active. Why? Because part of the upstairs brain, a part called the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, took charge with the labeling and then processed the emotion, allowing the thinking, analytical part of the brain to take over and soothe the irritated lower regions, rather than letting the reactive, emotional downstairs brain dominate and dictate the person's feelings and responses. This is a classic example of the name it to tame it strategy we discuss in detail in The Whole Brain Child. Simply by naming the emotion, a person feels her levels of fear and anger decrease. That's how the upstairs brain can calm the downstairs brain. And that's a skill that can last a lifetime. This is what we want to do for our kids when they become upset and act out, help them engage their upstairs brain. The prefrontal part of the upstairs brain actually has soothing bears that can calm the lower regions when they are reactive. The key is to grow them well in our children, and to activate them in a moment of distress by RST connecting before redirecting. We want our kids to develop the internal skill to calm the storm and re-ECT on what's happening inside. Think back about the functions of the upstairs brain: good decision-making, control over emotions and body, excitability, empathy, self-understanding, and morality. These are the aspects of our kids' character we want to develop, right? As we put it in The Whole Brain Child, we want to engage the upstairs brain, rather than enraging the downstairs brain. Engage, don't enrage. When we enrage the downstairs brain, that's usually because our amygdala is ring as well. And guess what the amygdala wants to do? Win. So when the amygdala in both the parent and the child are ring at top speed, both looking to win, it's virtually always going to be a dramatic battle that ends with both sides losing. No one will win, and relational casualties will litter the battlefield. All because we enraged the downstairs, rather than engaging the upstairs. To use a deodorant metaphor, it's as if you have a remote control for your child, and you have the power, at least to some extent, to determine what kind of a response you'll receive when you two interact. Press the engage button, the calm down and think button, and you'll appeal to the upstairs brain, activating a calming response. But push the enrage button, the freak out and escalate emotions button, by using threats and demands, and you'll be practically begging for the ting part of the brain to click into action. You'll poke the lizard and get a reptilian, reactive response. It's up to you which button to press. Remember, none of this is to excuse parents from the responsibility of setting boundaries and clearly communicating expectations. We'll give you lots of practical suggestions for doing so in the coming pages. But as you set those boundaries and communicate those expectations, you'll make things much easier on yourself, your child, and anyone else within shouting range if you appeal to your child's wiser and receptive self and her upstairs brain, as opposed to her lizard reactiveness and her downstairs brain. What's even more exciting is what happens after we appeal to the upstairs brain. When it gets engaged repeatedly, it becomes strong. Neurons that read together wire together. So when a child is in an upset state of mind and we invite the upstairs brain to become active, we create a functional linkage between that dysregulated state and an activation of the part of her brain that brings her back into a well-regulated state. We can likely grow those soothing bears that extend from the prefrontal upstairs brain into the downstairs brain. That means the more we appeal to our child's more integrated nature, the more we ask her to think before she acts or to consider someone else's feelings, the more we ask her to act ethically or empathically, then the more she'll use her upstairs brain, and the stronger it will become, because it is building connections and becoming more integrated with the downstairs areas. Using her upstairs brain will more and more become her accessible pathway, her automatic default, even when emotions run high. As a result, she'll become better and better at making good decisions, handling her emotions, and caring for others. Applying the brain C's. Let's talk now about what the 3 brain C's: changing, changeable, and complex look like in action. When Nina freaked out on the porch step, Liz's RST instinct was to logically explain how the transportation decisions had been made. Your sister's school is right by my work. She could have gone on to explain that Tim had more time to drive Nina to her school, and that Nina had just yesterday been asking for more time with her father. All of these statements were true, and rational. However, as we've said, when a child is in the throes of a meltdown, logic will often be inactive, sometimes even counterproductive. This is what Liz recognized as she looked at her Fury LLED daughter. In EECT, what she realized was the RST of the 3 brain C's. Nina's brain was changing. It was developing. Not developed, developing. Which meant that Liz needed to be patient with her little girl and not expect her to consistently control herself like an adult, or even like an older child. She took a deep breath and worked to remain calm, despite the stress being produced by the unreasonable 4-year-old, the impatient 7-year-old, and the ever-ticking clock. Just as important in this situation was the second brain C, that the brain is changeable. Liz understood that the way she and her husband handled each situation with their daughters wired the girls' developing brains, for good or for bad. So in this moment of awareness, Liz resisted the urge she currently felt, which was to hurriedly and even aggressively pick up her crying daughter, march her to Tim's car stomping all the way, strap her into her car seat, and slam the door. By the way, if you recognize yourself in the anger LLED depiction of how Liz wanted to handle the situation, you're not alone. We've all been there. See when a parenting expert loses it at the back of the book. Caring parents will often condemn themselves over every little mistake they make, or for every time they miss an opportunity to approach a difficult moment from a whole brain perspective. We urge you to listen to this internal critic only long enough to gain some awareness so that you can do better the next time, but then be generous and forgiving of yourself. Of course you want to do your best with and for your kids. But as we'll explain in detail in the book's conclusion, even parental mistakes can be extremely valuable for our kids. We can teach them we are all human, and we can take responsibility for what happens and make a repair. That's an essential teaching experience for all children. Liz was human and a parent, so of course she made her share of mistakes, as we all do. But in this instance she disciplined from a no-drama, whole-brain frame of mind and made an intentional decision to take a moment and be there emotionally for her young daughter. By this point the family was less than 1 minute behind schedule. And Liz realized that even though Nina's feelings seemed dramatic, they were real. She needed her mom right then. So Liz denied the impulse to do what was easiest and quickest, and again pulled her daughter close to her. As for specifically how she responded to the situation, that's where the third brain C complex comes in. Liz understood her daughter well enough to know better than to enrage the downstairs brain. It was plenty active already. Instead, she needed to engage Nina's upstairs brain. The RST step, though, had to be to connect. Before redirecting, we always connect. That's what Liz was doing when she held her daughter. Yes, she was in a hurry, but nothing positive could happen until Nina calmed down some, which didn't take long once she was in her mother's arms. In just a few seconds Liz felt Nina take a deep breath and her little body begin to soften. If Nina were your child, you might have handled this situation in one of a few ways, depending on your style and her temperament. Like Liz, you would probably seek as your RST goal to help your daughter calm down, so that her upstairs brain would come back online and she could listen to reason. You might promise to get up early tomorrow morning so you'd have time to take her to school. Or you might assure her that you'd ask your boss if you could leave work early this afternoon so you could pick up your daughter and then have some one-on-one special time with her. Or you might OER to tell her a story on speakerphone from your car as her dad drove her to school. As it turned out, Liz tried several of these strategies, all to no avail. No creative inspiration hit the mark. Nina was having none of it. Aren't you glad we didn't use an example in which that situation worked out nicely and perfectly? You're relieved, aren't you, because you know it doesn't always go that way. No matter how skillfully we handle a situation, and no matter how cognizant we remain of important information like the three brain C's, at times, our kids still don't do things the way we'd like. They don't pick up their toys. They don't automatically apologize to their brother. They don't calm down. Which is exactly what happened here. Nina would not cooperate. Listening to her feelings, holding her, coming up with a plan, nothing did the trick. But Liz still had to leave for work, and the kids had to get to school. So, remaining calm and empathic, that's our goal, she explained that they had to go, and that Tim would drive her to school this morning as planned. I know you're sad, and I understand that you want to ride with me. I would like that, too. But we can't make that work today. Would you like to climb in, or would you like Daddy to help you get in the car now? Daddy will be with you to comfort you on the way to school. I love you and I'll see you this afternoon. And with that, the front porch situation ended, with Tim holding a crying Nina as he carried her to his car. Notice what we're acknowledging here. No drama. Discipline can't ensure that your kids will act the way you'd like every time you address their behavior. The whole brain approach to nightly gives you a much better chance of achieving the short-term goal of encouraging cooperation from your children. It also helps remove or at least reduce the most explosive emotions in the situation, de-escalating the drama and thus avoiding the harm and hurt that result when a parent yells or personalizes the issue. But it won't always be effective at getting the exact behavior you hope for. Kids are human beings, after all, who have their own emotions, desires, and agendas. They're not computers we program to do what we want. But at the very least, as we're sure you'll agree after you read the following chapters, no drama. Discipline gives you a much better chance of communicating with your children in ways that feel better to both of you, build trust and respect between you, and decrease the drama in most discipline situations. What's more, a whole brain approach provides a way to show our kids how much we love and respect them, even as we discipline them. They know, and we reinforce it over and over throughout their lives, that when they're upset or acting inappropriately, we're going to be there for them. And with them. We don't turn our back or reject them when they're distressed. We don't say, or even imply, that their happiness is a condition they must meet to receive our love. No drama. Discipline allows us to communicate to our children, I'm with you. I've got your back. Even when you're at your worst and I don't like the way you're acting, I love you, and I'm here for you. I understand you're having a hard time, and I am here. No parent can communicate this message all the time in every scenario. But we can send it consistently and repeatedly, so there's never any question in our children's minds. This kind of predictable, sensitive, loving, relational discipline allows kids to feel safe. As a result, they have the freedom to become independent individuals whose brains are wired in such a way that they are better able to think through decisions, comprehend what they actually feel about a situation, consider others' perspectives, and come to a sound conclusion on their own. In other words, the experiences of emotional and physical safety give them the capacity to act responsibly and make good choices. In contrast, a parenting style focused on control and fear, stressing that a child needs to toe the line all the time, undermines that feeling of safety. If a child lives in constant worry that he might mess up and make his parents unhappy or that he'll be punished, he won't feel the freedom to do all the things that grow and strengthen his upstairs brain, considering others' feelings, exploring alternative actions, understanding himself, and trying to make the best decision in a given situation. We don't want our discipline to cause our children to focus all of their energy and neural resources on making us happy or staying out of trouble. Instead, we want our discipline to help grow our kids' upstairs brains. And that's just